Hello there guys, it's me Chase, and I'm going to continue my little Reformation series. Well, not Reformation, but Luther's journey to Worms, as it were, which is where it really all started. If you want to talk about when the Reformation really was getting going. Simple fact of the matter is, his the 95 Theses on the wall in the Wittenberg church door. That was not the start of everything. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. It wasn't intended to be anything super crazy or what it turned out to be. But we're gonna ahead of ourselves here. We're just continuing on with the series here. So I didn't really get to finish all of my notes, just because it's been quite a week for me. So it's been a little bit difficult because I was planning on finishing up everything and recording the video and stuff and putting it up on YouTube yesterday, which was Saturday from today, but got caught up with stuff. My cousin is back for the weekend, and for those of you who don't know, he's been in a rehab over his alcohol addiction, and he's been sober for 6 months. He's been getting some, from what I'm hearing, great biblical training. He's been baptized, and he's a different person. I see a different person in him, and so we've been really enjoying having him back for the weekend, and he's got to go back and finish his year, which is another 6 months. But he said he's loving it. He's so glad he's done it, and it's just that's really good to hear. That's good to hear over and against. I want to get out of here. I hate this place. Like, he actually likes it, and he's actually considering staying even after his time's done. So I think that's really cool. I'm really happy for him, and so we're going to be going to church with him today. He's going to church with us, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. But it is early in the morning too, by the way, so I'm being a little bit quiet. I don't want to be too loud for my neighbors. We are technically at awake time, but still, people are still sleeping, and they should be getting up and getting ready for church. I'm pretty much all ready for church, so I figured I can go ahead and do this video, but I have to do it a little bit quiet. So I hope I'm not going to be so quiet and so monotone that you start falling asleep. I hope so, but I'm going to be a little quiet here for this one. But like I said, I was planning on getting all this stuff finished by yesterday, and I wasn't able to do it because, like I said, my cousin's back in town. We've been spending a lot of time with him, so he goes back tomorrow, and I know, and I have to do this morning because I know I'm really not going to have time to do it later on to end the day today. So I'm gonna have to make do with what I got, and just hopefully I can do a pretty good job with what I want to get done here today. So last time we were kind of going into we're kind of getting introduced to what medieval life was like for Luther. What the kind of world that he grew up in, the late Middle Ages, and then during the Renaissance. You might say the middle of the Renaissance, something like that. Maybe towards the end of the Renaissance, perhaps. But this is Luther's context, and these are really important to understand, because understanding these helps us develop the context. It's just the same thing when we're studying the Bible. When we're studying, for instance, the book of Acts, understanding the context of the world that the apostles lived in helps us understand the way they behave, the way they act, and why things happen the way they happen, and things like that. So understanding that historical context is really, really important. It's the same situation here. So we spent a lot of time talking about the historical background of Luther's world in his Germany at that time, before we actually started getting into Luther himself. And we're going to spend a lot of time in this one, most of the time, talking about Luther and his life in the monastic order. And so but yes, we ended the last one talking about early life for Luther, the life that he was intending to have, and then what happened to him. And I think this is according to him. According to Luther, he almost got killed by a lightning bolt, and this close encounter with death thrust him into needing to know the state of his soul before God. Because lightning at that time, getting struck by lightning or even coming close, is an omen of the wrath of God upon you. Getting killed by lightning was not seen as a good thing ever. Like that's sort of like your God just hated you so much that he just struck you dead right there. That's how it was kind of seen. And so for Luther, this was a very serious matter. And so what Luther does is he forsakes his entire career into law, which he was doing really good at. He was like on track to just carte blanche right into it. And he threw it all away to his father's great displeasure. He threw it all away. And so what Luther does is he joins a monastic order in hopes of finding peace for his conscience with God for his own sinfulness. Now, it's really important to understand, this is another element of medieval life in Luther's day. Giving oneself the monastic life in Luther's day was seen as one of the most assured ways of finding restitution and salvation, salvational peace for your soul. So it's important to understand that in Luther's day, salvation was not seen as simply believing in Jesus, where one minute you're lost, the next completely saved just because you believed. That's not how it's, in evangelicalism today, that's what a lot of it is like. I'm really not for that kind of model personally. I think that's a little too simplified. I know we want to make things a little bit easier for people to understand, but sometimes we can get way too simplistic and we can actually do more damage than good. So I don't think it's a good thing to talk about salvation like punching your ticket kind of thing. I think it's better just to talk about salvation as a sort of like a both and kind of thing like that. It's both eternal, as in it's secured in eternity, and it is in sanctification. But anyways, I digress on that point. So yes, salvation wasn't seen as simply trusting Jesus, believing Jesus, and then you're saved. That's not what it was. Salvation could be lost in Luther's day. That's the general consensus, was that salvation could be lost. However, we have to, once again, it's very important for us to understand this. We talked about this in the last video. We have to once again guard against inaccuracies and tendencies to simplify things. That's what we like to do. As humans, especially humans who are just lazy, who just simply aren't interested in certain subjects, maybe like history, unfortunately, we just want simple versions of it so that we can just get a simple grasp, get it out of the way, and just not have to think about it anymore, which is unfortunately the way, even in evangelicalism, we think about salvation. That's why we go with the sort of once saved, always saved model, rather than exploring it a little bit more in depth and trying to come to a real firm, mature understanding of it. We just kind of want a very simplified version so we can just get on with a super cool Christian life or something like that. I don't know, something like that. But so it's the same thing here. We if you really want a mature, robust understanding of things, you just can't simply go the safe route, the simple route. So we have to avoid that tendency to simplify things. The common myth of modern evangelicalism is that in the medieval day and to this day, Catholics believe that you are saved by works. That's the very simple belief. This misconception allows many of us to sidestep and frankly not have to deal with Roman Catholic theology, because all we have to do is show them, and this just means that all we have to do is just show them the biblical witness of what Romans clearly teaches in Romans 3-4. Catholics believe you're saved by works, and we believe you're saved by faith. It's just so easy. It's Romans 3-4. And again, it's not that simple. And if you're gonna actually if you end up talking to a Roman Catholic who knows what they're talking about, you might get smacked in the face. Not literally, but you might just sort of get blindsided. But the fact is, in Luther's day, the belief was that in infancy, the person is baptized, and once baptized, they are infused with grace. They are infused with grace. Grace here is a means. Grace here means a real substance that puts. And when I say real, I'm not talking about a physical substance, but it may not be physical, but it's very real. It's a almost like a, I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but like an energy sort of thing. That's what grace is sort of seen as. That puts the Christian in right standing with God. At baptism, the Christian is indeed justified and sanctified. So that's one of the major differences between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, is that in Roman Catholicism, justification and sanctification are seen as synonymous with each other. They're conflated. Whereas in Protestantism, they are juxtaposed with one another, but they aren't the same thing. So justification in Protestantism is the act whereby God declares the believer just. So this is where we can talk about things like Romans chapter 3, verse 23 and 24. But we are declared righteous in God's sight. That's justification. And that's what happens when salvation occurs. But see, this is where we have to be careful in Protestant or evangelical circles to not simplify things, because there's a lot of confusion now today about, well, I'm saved just by believing Jesus, but why? But then all these work parts of in the New Testament we're always talking about, and even in the Old Testament. I don't know how that works. I mean, I'm not saved by my works, am I? But now I'm struggling with all this. And see, that's the danger when we simplify things. You have to distinguish between justification and sanctification. Justification happens when you believe, when you accept, when you trust, when you place your faith in the sacrifice of Christ. That's justification. You are justified in God's sight. But what follows from that now will be sanctification. And that's the Protestant view. So they are linked together, but they're not the same. They're still distinguished from one another. And making this distinction helps us make sense of the passages in the New Testament where Paul constantly, for instance, is exhorting us to do good works, to put off our sin, to continue in righteousness. And these are commands for those who are being sanctified, for those who have been justified. But again, when you don't understand, when you will not take the time to understand these important issues, it will lead to a lot of confusions. You may not express those confusions. You may just sit in church and watch your pastor talk about things that you should do and stuff like that as a believer. And then you may sit there confused, but you don't know how to ask the questions. And then this could lead to all kinds of problems. I'm saying this, I'm not a pastor, but I would consider this sort of a pastoral concern maybe for anybody who may be watching this. But you have to, don't be afraid to ask those questions so you can get a better understanding of how these things work, how the relationship between sanctification and justification are. So anyways, sanctification is a process by where believers are made holy. That's what sanctification is, the process whereby believers, that is the justified ones, are made holy. Justification comes first, sanctification flows or follows out of justification. So that's the important distinction that has to be made. And that's why I don't like the terminology once saved, always saved. I don't like that at all, because it gives off the impression that you can just make an intellectual assent to Jesus and never have to change at all. Anyways, from the point of, so going back to Luther's day and the Roman Catholic view of salvation, stuff like that. From the point of baptism, in the Roman Catholic system, the believer is infused with grace, and it is now up to that Christian to maintain that grace, or that's justification. That's really the better way to say it. Now they have to. It's up to them to sort of take care of it. It's like it's sort of described to me. It's like if you have a brand new car, and it's your car now. It's been given to you by grace. You didn't earn it, but now you have to take care of that car. But inevitably, of course, a car, even if you just leave it sitting, it's going to collect dust. It's going to get some kind of scratches. Some kind of damage is going to happen to it. It's inevitable. It's the whole process of entropy. Something's going to happen, and So by the end of your life, or the end of the life of that car, there's going to be damages, and as long as the damage doesn't become a total loss, um, you can clean all that up, and you can go to purgatory and finish your time there, as it were. That's a way to really look at it in the Roman Catholic system. So you're saved at baptism, and now it's up to you to sort of maintain and take care of that salvation, that justification, to sin as little as possible. And you do all that, you're good to go. Well, you're in good you're in a good place. You're not in the best place you could be, but you're in a good place. You're set for finishing your time up in purgatory and all that stuff like that. So and it's up to the Christian to maintain that, or to maintain their justification by the sacraments, and of course loyalty to the church. Through good works one gains merit in the eyes of God, and hence increases their favor in his sight. One of the ways one greatly increases their merit is by joining a monastic order. And that's just what Luther does, hoping that the kind of life he would be subject to would remove from his mind the guilt of his sin and replace it with peace. So again, in Luther's day, the general population, peasants, as it were, and miners like his dad, they're really busy with life. They're really kind of integral to the feudal world that they lived in. I mean, obviously the lords and the princes and all that, they were all the sovereign over the lands and stuff like that. They're like the important political figures that maintain order in the land, but they really wouldn't be much without their subjects, who are, in most cases, farmers and just peasants who really generate the economy that the leaders and stuff all live on. They benefit off of. But because those peasants are so busy with that kind of a life, they may not have the time, as it were, to be devoted to their Christian life. And that's not great, obviously, especially from a biblical perspective. That's definitely not good. You want to be a hard worker, but you can't neglect your biblical studies, which are the reason why you work hard. But that's the way it was in the medieval life. It was just sort of like, and there's a lot of similarities to that in our day too. How many people are just so busy with life and doing all this stuff that they just don't have time for God, but they want to call themselves Christians. They want to still claim to be believers. So they might go to church and just get a good message, and that's about it. And they just go home and back to what they were doing. The idea being that you just place your salvation, as it were, in the hands of your pastor, and if he just gives you a good word, well, he's a holy man, he's walking with God, so if he says I'm good, I must be good, man. That it's that simple. In effect, what it really does is it really is placing the responsibilities of your faith and your relationship with God in the hands of another person who you regard as, well, that's just his life calling. So, hey, if it's his life calling to look after or sort of keep charge over my salvation, I'm just going to put it in his hands then. I got stuff I got to do. So it's the kind of responsibility he wants. I don't want that responsibility, so I'm just going to give it to him and let him do it. That's really, in effect, the way a lot of people think in today's church, in today's Christian society, in America at least. It's not a healthy way to look at it at all. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that's basically the way it is. I think personally here in San Antonio, here in San Antonio, Texas, we have two freeways that one's kind of like this, and the other one sort of circles the other one. Well, we actually have three, I think, when you think about it. One that's like really, it's not really much of a ring. It's kind of warped and everything like that. It's right around the downtown area. That's why you don't really see it too much, because it doesn't really look like a ring. But after this one is the 410, and then after the 410, the much wider one that's on the outskirts of the city, sort of creates the boundaries of San Antonio almost. but is the 1604. And on the 1604, the northern ring, the northern area of the 1604, if you come here to San Antonio, there's a ton of these massive churches. They're huge. The north 1604 area is really the more wealthy part of San Antonio. It's where most of the wealthy people live, on the I-10 and on the 281 areas, and pretty much everything in between those two is where a lot of the wealthy people live, and a lot of the bigger churches are. These are big churches. John Hagee's up there, and they accumulate tons of people who go to these churches, these mega churches. There's like 4 or 5 of them up there. They're all nice and safe outside the city. My church, I don't want to brag, but my church, we care about the people in the communities, so we're pretty much right in the thick of all the sort of the not the rough areas, but just the more average-ish suburb areas of San Antonio. Anyways, and we're a tiny little church, but how many people are going to these mega churches? You know, these are mostly, if I were to visit one of these churches, I'd probably drive in and I'd see a lot of Land Rovers, and I see a lot of Porsches and nice cars from all the wealthy people who go to these churches. How many of these wealthy people go to these churches and they're so busy with life, with all these things, or businessmen and stuff like that, they don't have time to just be sitting down in the morning, you know, reading one of these, and all that stuff. And so they just kind of go to church on Sundays and just let the pastor give them a good word and give them a good encouragement as they go off on the rest of the week, and kind of thing like that. And so, anyways, all of that to say, that same thing, kind of concept, was going on Luther's day. There were just a lot of the peasant folks who were just so busy with life. Their calling, their vocation was not to be a Bible scholar or to study the Bible. Most of them didn't even have access to a Bible. They were there in the worldview that they lived in, the feudal worldview that they lived in. Their view, their worldview, their perspective was my role in God's kingdom. And you have to understand, in that medieval time, God's kingdom was a physical reality around them. So my role in God's kingdom is my farm, is this farm. This is my calling, as it were. And so my vocation is not, therefore, to read the Bible. My vocation is here, and so now my salvation, or not my salvation, but my standing, as it were, before God, is going to be placed in the hands of men whose calling is that's what their calling is. And so that's kind of the way they would, in that world, would see things. So there wasn't a ton of, in the peasant life, there wasn't a ton of prayer life, there wasn't a ton of devotional life kind of stuff. None of that really was going on. Not a lot of confession. Confession is very important for forgiveness of sins. And so the average peasant could expect a long purgatory, therefore. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're not saved. They're not going to be saved. But they will have a long purgatory life because they have so much unconfessed. They, again, go back to the car example. The peasant is given his car to take care of, but he doesn't have a ton of time to really take care of the car. He's got so much other stuff he's got to do, so many other responsibilities, raising all these kids, making sure they don't die. There's a high mortality rate among kids in those days, so he's got all this stuff he's got to worry about, or she's got to worry about. And so the car gets neglected, and so it's pretty beaten up. And I work in an auto detailing shop. There comes a certain point in the damage of a car, because it's neglected, to where you can't just polish that out. It's just not going to work. It's going to take a lot more to fix that. That's kind of what happens. And so how are you going to fix that at the end of your life? You have all this damage. How are you going to fix this in your car? Well, it would probably mean purgatory, and a longer purgatory life. So that's sort of what they had to look forward to. And so they may go to church once a year for like Easter, perhaps maybe for Christmas. That's about it. Get their confessions, and they may not even come because they don't visit their church very often. There's no way you're going to go to confession. I mean, let's say you go to church once a year. That's 365 days of not confessed sin. You're going to forget some sins. and you're not going to confess those sins. You're going to maybe give a very general, broad blanket sheet confession. That's not really going to cover it. And so, because you have these unconfessed sins, you have to basically work those out in purgatory when you die. And so the peasant, in other words, has a long purgatory life to expect. Now, how do you get out of that? Here's the thing I'm finally leading into. It took me a while to get here. I'm sorry, but how would you get out of that? Well, you become a monk, because monks spend their time confessing. Every single day they're confessing. So going back to the car thing again, once again, the car analogy. If the peasant has almost no time to tend to his car or salvation, and so that car is going to rust up. It's going to get pretty badly damaged, and that's a lot of problems he's going to have later on down the road. On the other hand, if your vocation is taking care of the car, your car is going to, the idea would be that your car is going to stay looking really, really nice. It's the same thing, like, another analogy is like dishes. See, I live by myself, so I don't have a huge problem with dishes. I kind of enjoy that. So whenever I'm finished with my food, I immediately go wash it, clean it, put the bowl away, put the silverware away. Boom. I've never used my dishwasher. I've used it once, but that's it. I've been here about to go on 2 years. I've only used my dishwasher once. Just never had to use it. I just clean my stuff up and then I'm good. I'm done. And so I never have to worry about falling behind in my duties in that area. So that's kind of the way Luther's looking at this in the monastic life. Luther is thinking, well, if I join a monastic order, I can be absolutely assured that the state of my soul is going to be right before God. And that's the way Luther is thinking as he's getting ready to join the monastery. So one of the ways to greatly increase, so Luther does this, hoping that the kind of life that he would be subject to, the monastic life, would remove from his mind the guilt of his sin and replace it with peace. But this was never achieved for Luther. The monastic life never gave him the peace he was looking for. His entire monastic life, he never found that peace. It should be noted that just like he was exceptional in law school, Luther was also very distinguished and exceptional in the monastery. Luther devoting himself to all his studies with passion and discipline. However, while Luther was known among his fellow laborers to be a very holy and good man, in his mind, Luther never had the peace he was looking for. For Luther, the hope was that through his monastic life he would find peace, but he continually battled the terrifying fear within himself that his whole life was a fraud, that the only reason he was doing this was to be freed of the guilt, and thus all his devotion was not done with true and pure piety towards God, but just for his own gain. And this tormented Luther. So Luther, well, let me continue on with this real quick here. I got my notes a little bit mixed up, but so Luther joined the monastery in Erfurt in 1505. As has been said, just like in law school, Luther distinguished himself as an outstanding preacher. But once again, going back to the point we were making before, Luther's hope was that he would join a monastic order, an Augustinian order. He would the state of his soul before God, he'd find that peace that he desperately wanted, but he never got it. Now it's really interesting because, like I said, Luther just excelled at like everything he put his mind to, which in this case now is the monastic order. So the holiness that he was living, even among his peers, it was considered to be really good. I mean, he was considered to be an incredibly holy man among his peers. The other friars with him and stuff. I was like, man, the Luther guy is just such a good, great, holy man. But in Luther's mind, this is the issue, is in Luther's mind, he wasn't. He may have been having that outward appearance to do well on the outside, but in his mind, Luther still had no peace of conscience. He was still tormented and tortured because in Luther's mind, he couldn't he could not escape the looming thought that the only reason he was being this holy was for his own gain and not for God. It was to rid his conscience of guilt, and that was the only reason he was doing all of this. Luther's the struggle that Luther has at this time is, I'm supposed to be holy. I'm supposed to live holy, but I have to live that holiness with a clear conscience, with a pure mind. But how do I know I have a pure mind? I can't. And he kept telling him, I can't just like say that I am, because something's not right inside of me. There's something wrong. And so this is what tormented Luther. This is what tortured him and tore him apart inside. When he joined the monastic order, one of the cool things that happened to Luther is he met a man named Johannes von Staupitz. He was vicar general of the Augustinian Friars of Saxony. He was professor of biblical studies at Wittenberg universities. Staupitz was crucial. He was crucial in Luther's early life in the monastic order. He was he became really a spiritual mentor, or like a father figure to Luther, while he was in the monastery. He was a spiritual mentor to the young German monk. Staupitz was a firm disciple of Augustine's doctrine of grace. He held very strongly to Augustine's doctrine of God's sovereignty and salvation. And this likely influenced Luther deeper, who, as we have seen, was tormented in his own soul and constantly in dread over his own capacity to earn God's favor. So clearly then the Staupitz model, or the Augustine model, was very attractive to Luther, because here's a man who's tormented by his own, he can't even really trust his own willpower. And so for someone who's like that, I'm a bit the same way, relying on human volition to will yourself to the love of God in Christ. Not very easy, and not something we tend to enjoy relying upon. I know for me, I struggle constantly with God's love for me. It is a daily battle. So that's one of the reasons why I love Luther, is I can relate so much to his torment, his struggle. But Staupitz was a huge help to Luther. He was a huge spiritual guide, very important in Luther's life. Staupitz was Luther's confessor, the one whom Luther regularly made confessions to. And like in most things, Luther stood out in his own confession time, spending sometimes up to 6 hours in confession with Staupitz. 6 hours. Think about that, 6 hours. So think about this. Let's say, I'm getting ready for church here. Church usually ends like at 11:30, and by 12, me and my friends at church, we usually go out to eat, just hang out for a little bit, and we're done by 2 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, because sometimes we spend about 2 hours sometimes just talking. A lot of times after that, we all depart, and I usually will go home. I'll maybe take a nap or something like that, and then wake up at about maybe 4 or 4:30, have a little time to myself, and then sometimes I will go and just spend I will at around 5 or 6 o'clock, I will go spend the last couple hours of the day with family. That would be at 6 o'clock. So from 12 to 6, all that stuff I would do from 12 to 6, Luther would be spending in confession. That's a long time. So he'd spend up to about 6 hours in confession to Staupitz. Now imagine the frustration one must have when you've spent literally half your day listening to a man confess his sins. Imagine that. Those guys in the monastery, they got a lot of stuff they got to do, a lot of time, and 6 hours doing one thing, not good use of your time. So imagine you're Staupitz and you're sitting in a confessional and you've been, well, they didn't have watches, but you're just kind of proverbial sort of. It's been 3 hours, man. Like how much longer is this gonna be? But of course, you're a confessor, and uh, you can't really say something like that. You've got to spend time with you got to pastor your young friars. um, but that imagine that 6 hours just sitting in there, and like that's pretty much the whole day just gone right there. So that's what happened with Staupitz and Luther. For Staupitz, though he was a patient man and a sensitive man, he had to give Luther some stern words. Among them, so a couple times Staupitz gets a little bit frustrated with Luther in his confession and goes, "Okay, let's take a break here." Like, okay, we gotta talk, kind of thing. And Staupitz has some words for Luther. And you gotta understand, these aren't words that Staupitz is not just going, "Okay, dude, that's enough. We're done. Stop it. Go back to what the heck's wrong with you?" Kind of. That's not what Staupitz does. Staupitz, even though Staupitz doesn't go do that, which would be abusive, he's a wise man. He still recognizes, I still have to give this young man some words that he clearly doesn't understand something here. And so one of the things that Staupitz says, and I read this in one of my books here, it's a really cool statement that apparently Staupitz said to Luther. So among the stern words that Staupitz had for Luther, one of them was this, quote, "God is not angry with you. You are angry with God. Do you not know that God commands you to hope?" And that's something that Staupitz said to Luther. Such a great thing to, like, a great analysis of Luther. That could be a tweet right there. Because he's right. Luther, he is angry with God. Luther several times early on in his in his ministry, one time he had I think it was a fellow friar, say to him, he asked him, "Hey, Brother Martin, do you love God?" And Luther's response to that question Luther says, "Sometimes I hate him. I hate God sometimes." And the reason why, again, is this is not Luther hating God because he wants to be an atheist or something like that. No, the reason why is because it goes back to, once again, the struggle that Luther has, because Luther couldn't get out of his mind the looming thought that Christ was his judge, not his advocate. He ready to release the lever and at any moment and plunge the poor man into hell forever. So for years, Luther struggled with this thought, engaging even in acts of self-flagellation, all in an effort to rid himself of the guilt of conscience he couldn't be rid of. He could not get rid of this. And this is one of the reasons why Luther was so frustrated with God, because he felt so burdened to give God something that he could never give God. And so that would naturally, I would think, because you're human, would naturally lead you to moments of hatred. Be like, this. I'll be honest with you. I've struggled with, sin. I've struggled with lust, and I still struggle with it today, of course. But I've been in prayer sometimes because here I am. I'm a single guy, and I don't want anybody commenting on this video saying, "Chase, if you don't want to be single anymore, well then look, I get it. I understand that. I appreciate that, but that honestly doesn't help me. Right now, honestly, I want to look on the bright side and the benefits of being single. And when you constantly tell me, "Chase, if you want this, you can do that," you're just bringing back up things that I'm trying to let go of. So I don't want any of that stuff. None of this is a cry for help. Okay, don't misunderstand this as a cry for help. All right, so but struggling, having that singleness, and struggling with that lust, I've had moments because I've sinned against God, and I've pursued my lust in terrible ways. I hate getting into the details of it. Sorry, it's so disgusting, and I hate it. where I've literally prayed, God, why can't you just get rid of this? Why can't you just get rid of these desires? I just don't. They're useless to me. It's just so. I hate it. So I've had moments of that, frustration. Like it's a useless passion. That's what I've said in prayer. It's a pointless passion. You know. Um, and so in Luther's mind, I'm sure he's going a similar thing. Why all these rules? What's the point of all this? If I can't do any of it. I just can't. Not even for a single day, I can't do it. If I could, I wouldn't have to go to confession, and things like that. So there's a frustration that Luther has here, a great struggle. And so naturally that leads to anger, frustration, sometimes hatred. So it was this torturous attitude of Luther that eventually led Staupitz to insist that Luther take up an academic career, in hopes not only to distract Luther from these thoughts, but to hopefully give him the peace he desperately wanted in helping others. So this led to Luther eventually, well, once again, let's remember Luther was very distinguished. So at the same time Luther's struggling with all this, he's also very distinguished as a great preacher, a great scholar. So Staupitz is like, hey, so you got these issues and you're also really good at this. Maybe what you need to do is you need to focus in on what you're really good at and just have a purpose in that, rather than just kind of doing regular monastery stuff, which does nothing for you apparently but allow you to dwell on your sinfulness. So what Staupitz has Luther do is it has him pursue an academic career. So in 1507, he was ordained to the priesthood, and 2 years later, Luther was asked to move to Wittenberg to become a junior lecturer at its new university, founded by Frederick the Wise. Frederick the Wise is, we're going to talk a little bit about him in future videos. I'm not sure which ones exactly yet, but Frederick, I'll just say this real quick. Frederick is a prince elector in the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, Saxony, being a little bit more precise here. But Frederick had a great ambition to make Wittenberg a rival city of holiness to Rome, and so he devoted much time and resources into making the city great. One of those things was to create a grand university flourishing with excellent scholarship. And this is the university in Wittenberg, where Luther will spend his academic career, and I believe the rest of his life, as it were, his career the rest of his career will be spent in Wittenberg. That's right, his career will be spent in Wittenberg. Everything in the Reformation that goes on, from this point on, the 95 Theses, Luther's preaching through the years, it's all really in Wittenberg. So we're going to pick it up from there on our next one. Hopefully I'll be able to get that done, Saturday or Sunday, coming Saturday or Sunday. But this is Luther's life in the monastery here. And just the next one we're gonna pick up is we're gonna be going into Luther's sort of breakthrough and his breakthrough in justification that he comes to, and how it kind of came about. How this is the answer to Luther's great problem that we see very clearly here in this video. And then what that's going to lead to in his debates that eventually follow in the years to come. So, and that, of course, is going to take us to Worms. But there you go. That's this one here. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Soli Deo Gloria. God bless. Bye.